Hi. So this week, our theme will revolve around the relationship between media consumption and our lived experiences. It's as though we're asking, what, if any, is the relationship between what we consume on the media and what we live? As in Jacqueline Bobo's study of the audience of the movie, The Color Purple, we all go through experiences of recognition in the way that we relate to media content. And over the next few minutes, I will relate this experience to the concept of trust and to how random our mediated experiences can be. And this is important to media literacy because media literacy depends on our media consumption habits and our media production habits. Remember, we are media prosumers. That is, we both consume media as well as produce media messages and products. So how this relates to media literacy is something that I think I would like you to think about through this talk. So just a housekeeping announcement before that. My effort through these brief videos is to bring in an overview as well as a kind of a perspective into the topic of the week. I deliberately dumb down the technology part of it so that the focus remains on the content. So I will not have fancy presentations and so on and so forth. I just want you to look at what I'm talking about. There will be a transcript attached to this, so you shouldn't have a problem if there's an audio problem. So I urge you to pay attention to the content, maybe make notes and so forth. These are mostly fresh perspectives that I hope that you can carry with you even after you complete the course. Okay. So back to trust. Well, broadly know what trust means, but for our purposes today, I would like to define trust as a vector. As we've probably learned in our science and math classes, a vector is something that has both magnitude and direction. So we can have high or low levels of trust in somebody or something. And at the same time, we have to trust something or somebody. So this trust can be unidirectional or bidirectional. I may watch a show because somebody I trust recommended it, but that has an influence on my trust that is directed towards the show itself. So I trust the show now. But does the show trust me? Well, when the producers produced the show, they trusted us to respond in specific ways. So it's bidirectional in that sense. But if that bidirectionality of trust is broken, then that relationship between the media producer and the media consumer also breaks down. Remember that this relationship is founded on certain principles. It could be knowledge, it could be entertainment or information, and so on and so forth. So this is something to bear in mind as you become media literate. And this is true of both creative as well as information or non-creative genres of content. It's basically, to say, fiction and news or documentary. And to give you a comparative example, in a sitcom, a situation may evoke our laughter because we may have lived that experience, right? Or simply it's something that we don't want to go through, someone slipping on a banana peel or somebody experiencing a bad hair day. On the other hand, a news report of police aggression on maybe a Muslim man in India may shock us. The actual news report may shock us. And yet that experience may be so distant from our own that our reaction and response will be different. Our geography, our history, whatever else constitutes our knowledge is going to be different. So it would seem ironic that we can often relate more to a piece of fiction than to an actual or factual story. And that there is a factor to that. And the factor is that there is a certain randomness attached to incidents. We don't know that a Muslim man was going to be attacked. And that's not the case in creative content. And so I trust I connect our trust levels in some ways to this randomness. Lived experiences are often random. So let's consider the case of the boy who cried wolf, right? This could be treated as news. It could be treated as a fictional story. Think about it. So Nabokov, who's a Russian writer, famously said in 1948 that literature was born on the day when a boy came crying wolf, but there was no wolf behind it. And for a moment, let's think about what he was saying. So Nabokov is referring to that space of uncertainty that piques our interest. In fiction, we trust the author to provide the answer at the end. We're not sure if there's a wolf or not, but because it's a story, we know we have to read until the end of the story to realize there's no wolf. We know that now. And the boy was essentially indulging in disinformation. That's probably what we would call it today. But what if there was a camera hanging over the boy's head constantly? Or there were a body camera watching his every move? We would then know that in the end, he was actually cooking up a story, or maybe he was cooking up a story, because that would depend on where the camera is, how zoomed in or zoomed out it is, how much of the actual vista we can see, and whether, of course, it follows the story or it follows the boy. If it follows the boy, like in a body camera, we only get the boy's version, and we are led to believe there's a wolf. Right? If it follows the story, that is, the boy is included in the camera, maybe the camera is zoomed out and we suspect there's no wolf, we can't see the wolf. And similarly, a microphone can capture the rustle of leaves, for example, the heavy breathing, even the growl we may associate with a wolf. But in the absence of those noises, we probably will speculate that the wolf doesn't seem to be there. And at this point, we're stuck by a dilemma. Either we trust the boy's word for it, or we can trust our senses, our eyes and ears, of what the camera has framed for us, of what the audio has framed for us. But that said, media literacy is not about knowing. It is actually about knowing how we must know, and often about knowing that we don't know. But in news and nonfiction, the way story unfolds, a story unfolds, is unpredictable, right? And that's why I call it random, remember? It therefore has to lead to new knowledge. The producer doesn't know the end of the story. Back in the 1950s, there was a theory called knowledge gap. I mean, the theory still exists, and that's why it's called a theory, because it still exists. That theory of knowledge gap proposed that in societies, there is a gap in the knowledge among people. And that leads to an aspiration of control, to know more and bridge that gap. So this is a psychological theory. Knowing more facts, therefore, should lead to better understanding. And better understanding would lead to our perception of truth in our minds. So that kind of consolidates itself and solidifies itself as the truth. But today, scholars also suggest that our belief system drives the direction of what we want to know. The more we learn, the more certain we become of something, because we have the choice to go in a certain direction of inquiry, maybe using a Google search or whatever. And then we end up trusting that knowledge. So the quest for knowledge is also the quest for reduction of randomness. But in order to learn, we must trust someone or something. So what happens if that trust is lost? When something is broken, we realize that the story that we were believing is actually wrong. Perhaps we then shift our trust elsewhere. We seek our knowledge from elsewhere. So that's the question I want to leave you with. This week, do read the executive summary portion of the Reuters Institute annual report. This is under optional reading, but you might want to read it. This executive summary starts on page 10. It gives you an overview of the trends of trust in the institutions of news media that people have. and it goes into different countries and so on and so forth. You can scan the contents for specific sections. For example, the United States section begins on page 112. You might want to read it to understand why less people in this country now trust the media. So that's about trust and randomness involved in our consumption of media content and media products. So you'll see, as I said before, that it applies to fiction and nonfiction both, probably in small degrees of difference. All right, have a great week.